There's a house in the Michigan wilderness that my family has owned for over 70 years. We pay the taxes on it every single year. We maintain it. We keep it standing. And not one person in my family has ever spent the night inside it. Not once. Not ever. Until I did. And now I can't leave. I need to be clear about something from the start. My family didn't warn me about the lodge because they were scared of old stories or worried about nothing. They didn't warn me because they knew I wouldn't listen. They knew me too well. And looking back now, they were completely right about that. The Hartwell Lodge sits about 40 miles northwest of Traverse City, deep enough in the Michigan wilderness that most GPS systems just stop working halfway there. The roads get smaller and smaller until your phone gives up and shows you nothing but a blank screen. My great-grandfather built it back in 1947, during a time when hunting camps were supposed to be simple and useful. Just 4 walls, a roof, and a place to sleep after a long day in the woods. Nothing fancy, nothing extra. But over the years, the place grew into something more than that. New rooms were added on. A generator was put in so there would be electricity. A proper well was dug so there would be clean water. Bit by bit, year by year, someone in the family was always doing something to keep the place running. By the time I was born, it looked almost like a normal vacation house. A modest one, sure, but a real home. The kind of place a family would be happy to spend their summers or their hunting weekends. Except for one thing. If vacation homes were typically surrounded by 70,000 acres of unbroken forest, we owned it outright. No mortgage, no property arguments, just a small tax bill every year that someone in the family quietly paid without making a big deal about it. But here's the thing that never made sense to me growing up. Nobody ever stayed there. Not during holidays. Not during hunting season. Not even for a single night. Not once, as far as I could ever figure out. My Uncle Mark kept some tools stored in the shed out back. My Aunt Carol had a few pieces of old furniture in one of the back rooms. People would stop by during the daytime to drop things off or pick things up. But stay overnight? Sleep under that roof when the sun went down? Never. Not one member of my family had ever done it. At least not in my lifetime. I asked about it once when I was 16. My father and I were driving back home from a camping trip, just the two of us, and I brought up how strange it seemed that we had this perfectly good property just sitting there empty all the time. We were paying taxes on it every year. We were keeping it maintained, but nobody was using it. It seemed like such a waste to me. My dad went quiet for a long time after I asked. His hands got tighter on the steering wheel. His eyes stayed locked on the road ahead, like he was thinking really hard about something, or maybe trying hard not to think about it. Finally, after what felt like a very long silence, he said, "We just don't, Danny. That's all there is to it." I pushed him on it. I asked why. I said it didn't make any sense. He added, in a lower voice this time, "Some places aren't meant to be lived in. The lodge is one of them. That should have been enough for me." For a long time, it actually was. Years went by and I didn't push it any further. I had my own life to deal with, my own problems to think about. I forgot about the lodge for long stretches at a time. And then I lost my job. Then I lost my apartment. Then, sitting at a family dinner one evening, feeling desperate and backed into a corner, I made what might have been the dumbest suggestion of my entire life. I said maybe we should think about selling the lodge, just to cover some debts, just to get back on solid ground. The reaction from everyone at that table was immediate and impossible to miss. My father stood up from his chair so fast it almost fell over. My mother went completely pale, like all the blood had left her face in 1 second. My Uncle Mark actually let out a laugh, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when someone is scared and doesn't know what else to do with that feeling. "You don't sell it," Mark said, his voice low and serious. "You don't even joke about that. Why the hell not? I shot back. I was angry and tired and desperate, and I had run out of patience for cryptic non-answers years ago. Nobody at that table said a word. They just looked at each other with the kind of silent understanding that families build up over many generations. The kind that leaves you standing on the outside, completely shut out with no idea what everyone else already knows. I left that dinner feeling furious. Not just angry, but actually furious in a deep and frustrated way. And 2 days later, I threw some stuff into my car and drove north. If they wouldn't explain it to me, I would figure it out myself. And if the lodge was sitting empty anyway, I could stay there while I sorted out my life. I needed a free place to live for a while, and we owned a perfectly good one. It made complete sense to me. Call it spite, call it stubbornness, call it whatever you like. I had made up my mind. The drive up there took about 4 hours. The last hour and a half was on roads that got narrower and narrower until I was barely on a road at all. More like a dirt track that someone had pressed into the ground a long time ago and never bothered to fix up. My cell signal disappeared around the 30-mile mark. 1 bar, then nothing. Just silence from my phone, the same as the silence outside. The trees pressed in closer with every turn I made. Thick stands of pine and birch that leaned in from both sides, blocking out the late afternoon sun above me. The light got darker and thinner the further I drove. By the time I was close, it felt like I was going through a tunnel made of trees. When I finally pulled up to the lodge and parked, I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes without getting out. I just looked at it. It was exactly the way I remembered it from the few times as a kid when the family had stopped by during the day to drop something off. We had never stayed, not even close, but I recognized the building right away. 2 stories tall, dark wood on the outside, the color worn down to a kind of weathered gray by years of Michigan winters and wet springs. A stone chimney rising up from the center of the roof, solid and old. The windows were all still in one piece, with shutters closed but not broken or rotting. The front porch steps didn't sag when I stepped on them. The whole place was in better shape than you'd expect for a building nobody lived in. Architecturally, as they say, it was sound. Someone had been keeping it up. Not perfectly, but enough to keep it standing and functional. But the silence was wrong. I want to be clear about what I mean when I say that, because it's easy to imagine that I just mean it was quiet. That's not what I mean. I grew up camping. My dad took me out into the woods every fall from the time I could walk. I know what wilderness sounds like. I know what real quiet sounds like. And this wasn't it. Birds call out. Branches creak when the wind moves through them. Small animals move through the dry leaves under the bushes. Insects make their sounds, especially in late summer. The forest has a rhythm to it, a constant low-level hum of living things going about their business. Once you've spent enough time outside, that sound becomes almost like music. It's comforting. It means the world around you is working the way it's supposed to. Here there was none of that. No birds, no insects, no wind, even though I could see the tops of the trees swaying slightly in the distance. There was movement, but no sound to go with it. The air felt heavy and damp, like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. I forced myself out of the car. The clearing around the lodge was roughly circular, maybe about 60 feet across, with the lodge sitting in the middle of it. Beyond that circle, the forest started up again in a solid wall of green and shadow. You could see where the clearing ended and the woods began as clearly as if someone had drawn a line on the ground. As I started unloading my bags and supplies from the car, I noticed something on the ground that stopped me. Animal tracks, lots of them. Deer prints, raccoon prints, what looked like coyote tracks. The whole clearing was full of them, but not a single one crossed over into the forest. They all came right up to the edge of the trees and stopped. The animals had been pacing back and forth along that invisible border, circling around, doubling back on themselves, but never going through. Not one of them had stepped into the woods. I told myself it was probably some kind of scent thing. Animals marking territories. Some logical explanation. There's always a logical explanation if you work hard enough at finding one. The front door was locked, but I had the key. My grandfather's original key, heavy and made of iron. The kind of old key you'd expect to find in a story about a dark old house. When I put it in the lock and turned it, the mechanism moved smoothly, no rust, no grinding. The door opened inward without making a sound. Inside, the lodge smelled like old wood and dust, the way any closed-up building smells after a while. But not decay, not the smell of a place that's been forgotten or abandoned. The furniture was covered with white sheets, but underneath them, you could see that everything was arranged carefully. The kitchen was clean. The stone fireplace in the main room had been swept out. Someone had been coming here, not to stay but to keep the place in order. I walked through every room slowly, turning on lights as I went. The generator out in the shed kicked in without any trouble, chugging away steadily. The water ran from the taps. The propane stove in the kitchen clicked on with a flame. Everything worked. Everything was just fine, except in the main room. When I pulled the sheets off the walls and looked around, I noticed something odd. There were clean rectangles on the walls, lighter patches in the dust where picture frames used to hang. I remembered those photos from when I was a kid, on the rare times we'd stop by during the day. Old hunting photos, family portraits going back generations. My great-grandfather standing proud next to a massive buck. They had always been there. Now they were gone. And not just moved somewhere else in the room. They were completely absent. I checked every closet and every room and every drawer in the whole building. No photos, no family records, nothing personal at all. No journals, no notes, no helpful list of instructions or warnings or anything like that. Just an empty waiting house, scrubbed clean of anything that might tell you who owned it or why they cared. I made dinner from canned goods I'd brought with me, heated up on the old gas stove. I boiled water for coffee and sat at the kitchen table and tried to convince myself this was going to be okay. The family's strange behavior was just old family stuff. Some accident years ago that nobody had ever properly dealt with. Some bad memory that got turned into a superstition over time. That happens with families. Stories get passed down and they get bigger and scarier with every telling until nobody quite remembers what was true at the start. As the sun went down outside, I went through the lodge and closed the shutters on every window. I told myself I did it because I didn't want animals looking in while I slept. But that wasn't really why. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. The darkness outside felt like something pressing up against the glass. Like it was leaning in, looking for a way inside. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I made up the bed in the downstairs bedroom, the one my grandfather had used years ago. I left a lamp on beside the bed. I pulled a book from my bag and tried to read it. Outside, the silence continued. No owls, no night birds calling out. Nothing. Around midnight, that changed. I heard wind, but it wasn't the right kind of wind. Natural wind comes and goes, rises and falls, changes direction. This was different. It was steady and rhythmic, like something breathing. Long, slow pulls in, then long, slow pushes out. The walls creaked with each inhale. The shutters rattled with each exhale. It had a pattern to it like lungs working. And then I heard the footsteps, slow and measured, circling around the outside of the lodge. Not running, not stumbling around in the dark. Walking with purpose, one careful step at a time, going around and around the building in a steady circuit. Pacing the edge of it, testing. I sat up in bed and held completely still, listening hard. The footsteps went all the way around once. Then again. Then a third time. Each time around, they sounded a little closer to the walls, as if whatever was out there was moving gradually inward, getting nearer. And then, right outside my window, inches from where I sat frozen in the bed, came whispering, low and soft, conversational almost, like people talking quietly at a dinner table. Multiple voices at the same time, layered over each other, speaking too quietly for me to make out the words. But they were definitely words, definitely voices, not wind, not animals, voices. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I sat there in that bed and stared at the shutter over the window and waited. The whispering stopped. The footsteps moved away and kept going, continuing their circuit until they faded out. By the time the sun came up, I was still awake. I hadn't slept a single minute. I was lying on my back staring at the ceiling, telling myself all the logical things. Isolation plays tricks on your brain. Old houses make noises you're not used to. Wind through trees sounds like voices when you're tired and your mind is already worked up. I didn't believe any of it, but I kept saying it to myself anyway. When I finally worked up the courage to open the front door and step out onto the porch, I stopped dead. Footprints, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pressed into the soft, wet earth all around the lodge. Bare feet, human-shaped, leading right up to the walls of the building, getting within inches of the wood, and then simply stopping. No tracks going back. No tracks heading off toward the trees. Just footprints that went up to the lodge and disappeared, as if whatever made them had walked up to the wall and then ceased to exist. I stood on that porch in the cold morning air and finally understood why my family had never stayed here. But by then, of course, it was already too late to leave. I spent the whole first morning trying to find a rational explanation for those footprints. I took photographs of them from every angle I could think of. I measured them with a ruler I found in the kitchen. I got down on my hands and knees and looked for any signs that someone had made them artificially, pressing shapes into the mud with something. They were uniform in size, adult-sized, bare feet with normal human proportions. Each one pressed about half an inch into the soil. Real weight behind them, too many to count, overlapping in places, creating a completely trampled ring all the way around the building. My brain kept offering explanations. Local teenagers pulling a prank on a dark night. Homeless people passing through. Some kind of survivalist group camped nearby. There was always an explanation. There had to be. But the footprints hadn't come from the forest. They hadn't walked out from between the trees. They simply started existing at the edge of the lodge and went from there, as if whatever made them had appeared out of thin air right beside the building. And then I noticed something else. Where the footprints came closest to the walls of the lodge, the wood was marked. Not damaged exactly, not scratched or gouged, but touched. Smudges that looked exactly like handprints, at about shoulder height, spread all the way around the building. Dozens of them, as if something had been pressing its palms flat against the outside walls while it walked around, feeling the wood beneath its hands. I got a rag and wiped them off. They came away easily, leaving no stain behind. The wood underneath looked completely normal, but the act of standing there cleaning them off, being so close to where those hands had pressed, made me feel watched. Like something was observing me from a distance, noting my actions, and waiting to see what I would do next. I kept looking toward the tree line, expecting to see someone standing there at the edge of the forest. Nobody was there, but the feeling didn't go away. By noon, I had talked myself into staying one more night. Leaving felt like giving up, like admitting the family's unspoken fear was real, and I had been right to be shut out of knowing about it. I was 32 years old. I was broke. I was exhausted from months of things going wrong. and I was completely tired of running away from warnings that nobody would bother to explain. If this place was actually dangerous, I needed to understand how and why. If it wasn't, I needed to prove to myself and everyone else that the fear was baseless. Either way, I needed another night. I spent the rest of that afternoon telling myself that and trying to believe it. I walked around the clearing twice, checking every inch. The forest was silent and still, just as it had been. I looked over the generator, the water pump, the propane tanks. All of it was working just fine. I searched the lodge again from top to bottom. Every room, every shelf, every drawer, every cabinet. Nothing. Whoever had removed the photographs and the personal items had been very careful and very thorough about it. The lodge was a shell, maintained on the outside but completely hollowed out on the inside, emptied of identity. As the sun started going down, I made a plan. I would stay awake again. I would write down everything that happened. I set up my phone to record audio and left it on the bedside table. I put a flashlight right next to it where I could grab it fast, and I left the shutters on one window cracked open just an inch, just barely enough to see out if I needed to. If something was circling the lodge in the dark, I wanted to be able to see it this time instead of just hearing it. The darkness came fast under the tree canopy. One moment there was pale gray light coming through the gaps in the shutters. Then it was simply night, as if someone had reached over and flipped a switch. The change was too fast, too sudden to feel natural. And with the darkness came the cold. I don't mean it got chilly. I mean the temperature dropped fast, maybe 15 degrees in just a few minutes. My breath started coming out in little clouds in front of my face. I checked the thermostat on the wall. It said 72 degrees. I held my hand over the heating vent in the floor. Warm air was definitely blowing out of it, but the room felt like the inside of a refrigerator, as if the cold was coming from somewhere the heater couldn't reach. I put on my jacket. I turned on every light in the lodge, and I sat down on the bed and waited. The footsteps started at 9:14 in the evening. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone when the first sound came. One soft, deliberate step on the porch boards, right in front of the door. Then another, moving left, circling around toward the side of the building, exactly as before. I stood up quietly and moved to the window I'd left cracked open. My hands were shaking. I pressed my face close to the gap and looked out into the dark. For a long moment I saw nothing, just darkness and the vague shapes of trees in the distance. Then I saw movement, not someone walking, something swaying. Figures standing at the very edge of the clearing, rocking gently from side to side the way a person does when they're standing outside in the cold, trying to stay warm. I counted 6 of them, maybe more. It was hard to tell because they were standing in the shadow, right in the space between where the lodge's lights ended and where the darkness of the trees began. Right on the edge of visibility. They weren't coming closer. They were just standing there, watching, and then one of them spoke. "Hello!" A woman's voice, clear and normal the way a neighbor might call across a yard. Friendly sounding. "Is someone there? I think I'm lost." Every part of me wanted to answer. Every instinct I had screamed at me to call back, to help, to let her know someone was here. But something underneath all of that felt wrong. The tone of the voice was too even, too calm, like someone reading lines from a page rather than someone actually scared and lost in the dark. I didn't answer. The voice came again, from a different spot now. Not from where I'd first heard it, but from the side of the lodge instead. "Please, I've been walking for hours. I just need to use a phone." Same flat, steady tone. Same careful pacing of the words. And the voice hadn't moved the way a real person would have moved. It had jumped from one position to another without any footsteps in between. I stepped back from the window. My heart was going fast. The whispers started next. The same overlapping sound from the night before. Many voices at once, too quiet and too layered to understand clearly. But now I could start to pick out pieces of it. Fragments. My own name repeated softly. My father's name. My grandfather's. Names going back through the family. Spoken one after another like someone reading a list. Too softly to sound threatening. Loud enough to be completely real and undeniable. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the cracked shutter. The beam swept across the clearing. Nothing there. The figures I'd seen or thought I'd seen were gone. The clearing was empty, but the whispering kept going, completely unbothered by the light, still circling the lodge in that same slow, deliberate pattern. I stood at that window for 2 full hours, listening, watching. I had set up my phone to record, but there was nothing visible to record. Just sound, just presence. Around midnight, everything stopped. Not gradually, the way normal sounds fade out. Stopped all at once, like someone pressing pause. The whispers cut off in the middle of a syllable. The footsteps ceased. The unnatural cold began to lift slowly from the air. I waited another hour before I let myself sit down. I didn't sleep. I stared at that window until the light started coming back, watching for movement that never came. When the sun was up, I went straight outside. The footprints were back. A fresh layer on top of yesterday's prints, pressed even deeper into the ground this time. But there was something new this morning. Scratches on the front door. Long vertical marks. For parallel lines dragged downward from the very top of the door frame all the way down to the handle. Not deep enough to split the wood, but clear and deliberate. On purpose. I touched them carefully. The inside of the grooves was smooth, almost polished feeling, as if the same marks had been made over and over again across many nights, wearing the wood down gradually into these perfect channels. How many nights had this happened before I arrived? How long had this lodge been walked around, tested, and marked? I stood on the porch and looked out at the tree line, and I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The forest was closer than it had been the day before. I was sure of it. Not by much. Not enough that you'd notice immediately if you weren't paying attention. But the pines that I had a clear memory of being about 15 feet from the lodge perimeter now seemed to be standing at about 10 feet. The clearing was a little smaller. The gap between the building and the trees a little narrower. I walked to the edge of the clearing slowly and stopped just before the line where the footprints always ended. I crouched down and looked at the ground carefully. The soil was different on either side of that line. On the lodge side, the earth was normal, soft and dark, the way good forest soil is supposed to look. On the forest side, just a few inches further in, it was harder, drier, a lighter color, almost pale. Like 2 completely different kinds of ground meeting at an invisible border, each one belonging to its own world. I picked up a small stone and threw it into the trees. It landed with a quiet thud and disappeared into the brush. Normal, expected, but the forest didn't react. No birds flew up startled. No small animals scattered from the noise. The stone made a sound but caused no ripple. Like throwing something into a photograph of a forest instead of a real one. I walked back to the lodge quickly. That night I lay in bed with the lights on and listened to the footsteps circling. And I didn't look. I just lay there and stared at the ceiling. And for the first time I let myself accept what I already knew somewhere underneath all the explaining and rationalizing. I was afraid to leave. Not because anything was physically stopping me, but because I was afraid that whatever came to the lodge each night might follow me if I ran. That running or leaving or showing that I was scared was exactly what it wanted from me. So I stayed still and I listened to something patient and exhausting test the walls of my shelter in the dark. Listening to it learn. My cousin Derek arrived on the 3rd morning, coming down the access roadway too fast in his truck. Country music blasting from the open windows. I could hear him coming from a quarter-mile away. It was the first genuinely normal sound I had experienced in 72 hours, and it hit me like a glass of cold water to the face. He pulled up next to my car with a big cooler full of beer in the truck bed and all his hunting gear piled in the back. He had that loud, confident energy some men carry around like a second jacket, the kind that fills up a room and pushes everything else to the edges. Derek was the same age as me. He worked construction downstate. He had apparently decided, somewhere along the way, that the family's warnings about the lodge were just a trick to keep good hunting land locked up and unused. His words, not mine. "Danny!" He climbed out of the truck grinning, like we were meeting up for a backyard party rather than at the edge of something that had kept me awake for 2 nights straight. "Heard you were squatting up here. Figured I'd come bag a buck. Show everybody there's nothing to be scared of." I wanted to tell him to get back in his truck and drive away. I wanted to tell him about the footprints and the voices and the way the trees seemed to be moving closer. But standing there in the bright morning sunlight, with Derek's straightforward good humor hitting me from every direction, all of it sounded completely crazy even to my own ears. "You shouldn't stay after dark," I said instead. He laughed. "Come on, man. It's just woods." "What, you actually believe the ghost stories now?" "There are no ghost stories," I said. "That's the problem. Nobody will explain what's actually wrong with this place because nobody will say a single specific word about it." He hauled his gear up onto the porch. "It's free real estate in the middle of good hunting territory. The family's just weird about old stuff. Always has been." I helped him unload, mostly because I didn't know how to stop him without sounding insane. And honestly, part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted his certainty to be catching, like a cold, spreading over into me and wiping out the dread that had been building in my chest for the past 2 days. We spent the afternoon the way hunters spend afternoons, scouting, setting up a basic blind at the edge of the clearing, talking about nothing that mattered. Derek drank steadily, told long stories about cousins I hadn't seen in years, complained about his ex-wife in the tired way people complain about things they've already accepted. Normal things, normal behavior, but I kept noticing things he didn't notice. The way his voice seemed to go too far when he spoke, carrying into the silent trees and coming back just slightly wrong, like an echo in an empty room. The way the trunks of the trees he leaned against felt cold even in the afternoon sun. The way no birds ever settled in the branches above us, no matter how long we sat still and quiet. Derek didn't seem to notice any of it, or chose not to. "You see any deer sign?" he asked at one point, looking at the ground near the tree line. "No," I said. "Nothing in the woods at all. Only tracks in the clearing." "Weird," he said, standing back up and brushing dirt off his hands. "Should be everywhere this time of year." He shrugged it off. "Well, we'll get lucky tomorrow morning. I can feel it." As the sun dropped lower, he got a fire going in the lodge's big stone fireplace and sat in front of it, talking about his plan for the next morning, debating out loud which rifle to bring. I made us dinner, chili heated from cans, and tried to act like everything was normal. But I was watching the windows the whole time, watching the light drain out of the clearing, watching the moment coming when the dark would arrive and the circling would start again. Derek didn't notice any of it. He was on his 4th beer, happy to have company after driving up alone. "You really stayed here alone?" he asked. "2 full nights? And nothing happened? Nothing weird?" "Depends on what you call weird," I said carefully. "I mean like, ghost appears, chains rattling, that kind of thing." "No, not like that." "Then what?" So I told him. All of it. The footprints, the whispering voices, the scratches on the door. The cold that came from nowhere and had nothing to do with the temperature on the thermostat. I kept my voice even and flat, just reporting facts the way you'd give a statement to a police officer. No drama, no embellishment. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which surprised me. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You think someone's messing with you?" he finally asked. "I think something is out there," I said. "Something or someone. Does it matter which? Matters if we're calling the police or loading the shotgun," I said. "Cell phones don't work out here, and I don't think a shotgun would help with this." "Shotgun helps with everything, Danny," he said, and he wasn't completely joking. He stretched his arms above his head and stood up. "Look, you've been out here alone for 2 nights. That messes with your head. Having 2 people here changes the whole thing. Whatever's going on, it's probably teenagers from somewhere up the road or some vagrant passing through. They try anything tonight, we deal with it. Simple." There was no point in arguing with him. He had already made up his mind about what was real, and the only thing left to do was wait for reality to disagree with him in a way he couldn't ignore. The footsteps started at 9:30. We were sitting in the main room, Derek cleaning his rifle carefully, me holding a book open to the same page I'd been looking at for 20 minutes. The first soft impact on the porch boards stopped both of us cold. "What the hell?" Derek put down the rifle and stood up. He walked to the nearest window. "Don't open the shutters," I said, fast. "Why not? Just don't." But he already had, pushing one shutter open an inch and pressing his face to the glass to look out. His breath fogged on the window pane. "I don't see anything," he said. The footsteps kept going, moving around the left side of the lodge, slow and deliberate, exactly as they'd been the previous 2 nights. "Someone is walking around out there," Derek said, his voice getting tight. "I can hear it." "I know. So let's go out and check." "No." I stood up. "Derek, listen to me carefully. Don't go out there." "Why the hell not? If it's people, we make ourselves known and they run. If it's an animal, same thing. It's not people and it's not an animal." He looked at me, really looked at me this time, and I saw something I hadn't expected to see in his face. Not fear yet, but a crack in the certainty. Just the first small hairline fracture. Then we both heard it. A woman's voice, clear and close, coming from somewhere near the trees. "Help! Please! Somebody help me!" Derek's head snapped toward the sound. "Someone's hurt." "No," I said. "How would you know that?" "Because I heard that exact same voice 2 nights ago. Same words, same tone, word for word." The voice came again, more urgent this time. "Please, I'm lost. I think I'm hurt. Is anyone there?" Derek grabbed his flashlight off the table and started toward the door. I got hold of his arm. "Derek, stop. Think about this. Why would someone be hurt and calling for help in the middle of nowhere? How would they even get out here? There's no way in except the road we both drove, and you didn't pass anyone on your way here. I don't know how, but I'm not going to just stand here while someone—" "It's not someone." My voice came out louder than I meant it to, almost a shout. "It's something trying to get you to leave the lodge. That's what it does. Calls out. Pretends to be things you want to help. And if you go out there, you are not coming back. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" He stared at me. I watched him process what I'd said. I watched him weigh it against everything in his own nature, every instinct that told him to be the guy who goes out and handles the situation, against his pride, against his sense of himself as the kind of man who doesn't hide inside while someone calls for help. I watched him decide. "I'll be fine," he said, and pulled his arm free. "You stay in here if you want to." He checked the chamber of his rifle, then thought better of it and left it there. He grabbed his flashlight instead, walked to the door. opened it, stepped out onto the porch. I should have grabbed him, should have physically blocked the door, should have done something more than just watch him go. But I didn't, and God help me, I know why. Part of me wanted to see what happened. Part of me needed the proof, needed the thing that would finally make all of this undeniable. The woman's voice called out again from deeper in the trees. "Please, over here." "I'm coming," Derek called out. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the clearing and hitting the wall of trees beyond. Nothing there. No woman. No movement. But the voice kept going, pulling him further in. "This way. Hurry." Derek went down the porch steps and crossed the clearing toward the trees. I stood in the doorway and watched his flashlight bob through the dark. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, right at the spot where the footprints always ended. "Hello?" he called. "Where are you?" No answer. Silence. And then he stepped between the trees, and the silence broke. I heard thrashing, branches snapping, Derek's voice raised in sudden confusion. "What the hell? Where did?" And then the flashlight went spinning out of his hand and the beam swung wildly, catching something moving through the undergrowth. Something fast. Something that moved in a way that wasn't quite right. "Danny!" Derek screamed. Just once. Loud and sudden and cut off. The sound should have echoed off the trees. It should have bounced around and come back to me from different directions. Didn't. It just stopped, like the forest opened up and swallowed it. Here one moment, gone the next. Then nothing. No more sounds from inside the trees. No more thrashing. No more voices. Just the beam of Derek's flashlight, lying on the forest floor, pointing at nothing, slowly growing dim. I stood in that doorway and stared at it. Time stopped making sense. Maybe 10 minutes passed. Maybe 30. The flashlight dimmed, flickered, went dark. And then the footsteps started up again outside the lodge, circling patiently in the dark. As if nothing had changed. As if Derek had never been there at all. I closed the door, locked it, backed away from it. Derek didn't come back. At dawn, I went out looking. I crossed the clearing and found the exact spot where Derek had walked into the trees. His boot prints were right there in the soft earth, pressed deep, going forward between two pines. I followed them into the trees. 10 feet in, they stopped. Not faded out, not covered over. They simply stopped existing, mid-stride, as if Derek had been lifted straight up off the ground and taken. His flashlight was lying in the dead leaves where I'd watched it fall. I picked it up. The casing was completely undamaged. I couldn't see a single scratch or crack on it. But when I tried the switch, nothing happened at all. I unscrewed the back panel. The batteries inside were completely destroyed. Not just dead. Corroded and swollen. Cracked open. Leaking black fluid. The kind of damage that takes years to happen. Years of sitting in a damp place, slowly rotting. Not the kind of damage that happens from dropping a flashlight once. I searched for over an hour. I called Derek's name over and over. I found nothing. No blood. No torn clothing. No marks on the ground suggesting anything had been dragged. Just his footprints going forward and then his absence. When I walked back to the lodge, I found fresh scratches on the front door. Longer than before. Deeper. Gouged all the way through the stain down to the raw pale wood underneath. For parallel lines the same as before. Like something keeping a tally of the nights. Or the people. I sat on the lodge floor for a long time with my back against the wall, staring at Derek's rifle still propped in the corner of the room. He had left it there. He'd been so confident that all he needed was a flashlight. The rifle sat there useless and still, like a monument to being wrong about what kind of danger you're in. I knew I should get help. I should hike back to where my cell signal came back and call the police. Report Derek missing. Get search teams out here. That was the rational, normal, responsible thing to do. But I sat there on that floor and I couldn't make myself do it, because I knew with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with logic that Derek was gone in a way no search team was going to understand or be able to do anything about. And more than that, something in me had stopped believing that leaving the lodge during the day was actually possible. Nothing had physically prevented me from going. But every time I thought about walking to my car and driving away, something inside me locked up. Like stepping outside would mean accepting an invitation I'd been refusing since the moment I arrived. So instead I searched. I went through every single room in that lodge systematically, looking for anything the family might have left behind. Instructions, warnings, an explanation of any kind. They had removed the photographs and cleared out all the personal things. But this place had been in my family for generations. Decades of people coming here, maintaining it, knowing things about it that they never wrote down anywhere obvious. Someone at some point had to have written something. I went through the kitchen cabinets. Old dishes, mouse droppings, nothing else. The bedrooms had only furniture. The basement was small and smelled damp and held nothing but the water heater and a stack of firewood. That left the attic. I had noticed the access panel in the second floor ceiling on my very first walkthrough, but hadn't thought much of it. Now I dragged a chair under it, stood up on unsteady legs, and pushed the panel open. Cold air and the smell of old insulation came down at me. I pulled myself up through the opening using the edge of the beam and used my phone's flashlight to see. The attic was bigger than I expected, running the whole length of the lodge. Heavy beams crossed overhead at regular intervals. Cardboard boxes were stacked along one wall. Christmas decorations, old hand tools, junk from decades of use. The usual accumulation of things a family stores and never throws away. But in the far corner, pushed behind one of the support beams where it would be completely invisible unless you were specifically looking for it, I found something different. A metal lockbox, the kind the military used. Olive green paint, rusted at the corners, dented in places, but solid and intact. I carried it carefully down the attic ladder, both hands shaking, and set it on the kitchen table. No padlock on it. Just a simple latch mechanism that had corroded enough over the years that I had to work it loose with a kitchen knife before it would open. When it finally gave way, the hinges squealed. Inside, a notebook, thick and weathered, wrapped carefully in oilcloth the way you'd wrap something precious. Were dangerous. Beneath the notebook, several loose photographs, the same ones that had been taken down from the walls. And underneath those, a small stack of newspaper clippings, yellowed and crumbling at the edges. I unwrapped the notebook first. The cover was plain leather, water-stained, and cracked from age. I opened it slowly, the way you open something you're not sure you want to see. The first page, written in careful, neat handwriting, read simply, "Rules for staying." My throat went dry reading those 3 words. The handwriting changed as I turned the pages. Different people, different times, different pens and pencils. Dates going back to 1952. Going forward through the 1960s, the 70s, the 80s, all the way to what looked like the late 1990s. Every few years, a new hand had added something. And in the margins, squeezed into every available space, small, desperate annotations. Side notes added later by people who had learned things the hard way. The first entry was dated October 1952, my great-grandfather's careful script. If you must stay at the lodge after dark, observe the following without exception. 1. Never leave the lodge after sunset for any reason. If you find yourself outside when the darkness comes, do not try to come back. Walk directly to the road instead. Below this, in completely different handwriting that looked like it had been added in a hurry, James didn't listen. October 67. 3 days before, we found him walking in circles 6 miles south. He didn't remember leaving. 2. Do not respond to voices outside, regardless of what they say or who they claim to be. Do not answer questions. Do not acknowledge their presence in any way. Margin note, acknowledged once. It knew my daughter's name the next night, then my wife's, then things it had no possible way of knowing. No date, no signature. 3. Keep all windows shuttered after dark. If you must look outside, do so briefly and only through the smallest opening possible. Never make eye contact with anything you see outside. Margin note, made eye contact. NOV 74. Stood there until dawn. Same face as mine. Robert H. 4. If you hear footsteps circling the lodge, remain still and quiet until they pass. Do not count them. Do not try to figure out how many there are. Someone had underlined that last sentence so hard the paper was almost worn through. Then added below it, counted to 47 before I stopped. There weren't 47 of anything out there. There was one. 5. Do not sleep facing the windows, even if the shutters are closed. Face the interior walls or the ceiling only. No margin note on this one. Just a date circled over and over with increasing pressure. August 12, 1981. 6. If something knocks on the door, do not respond. If something scratches, do not investigate. The structure will hold. Margin note, structure held, door held. I didn't. MH. June 88. The rules kept going, getting more specific and more disturbing with every page. Some had been crossed out completely with the word wrong written next to them in large letters, or made it worse, slashed across the line. Others had been changed and refined, clearly updated based on experience. Someone learning terrible things one at a time. 7. Do not bring photographs of family members to the lodge. Do not keep personal items with strong connections to people you love. It will use them. 8. If the temperature drops suddenly, move to the interior room and wait. Do not try to warm the space. The cold will pass on its own. 9. Never follow anything into the woods, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it promises you. This one had been underlined so forcefully that the pen had torn completely through the paper on the last pass. Next to it, Thomas followed. November 59. Found his coat 2 years later, folded neatly on the porch. Nothing else. I kept reading, feeling sick in a slow, deep way that didn't have anything to do with my stomach. Every rule was evidence of someone learning something awful. Every margin note was proof of what happened when the rules were broken. Halfway through the notebook, the writing changed, less like a rule book, more like testimony. People writing down what had happened to them, what they had seen, what they had survived, and how and what it cost them. A 1978 entry, written in shaky handwriting that suggested the person's hands were trembling while they wrote. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants us to join it. Karen said she felt invited when she heard the voices, like something was making her an offer. She said no, but it was hard. God help her. She said it was genuinely hard to say no. A 1983 entry. The forest isn't natural. We had surveyors out here before Dad died. They couldn't map it properly. Every measurement contradicted the previous one. Paths that should run straight came back curved. Distances that should stay fixed kept changing. One surveyor went in with a full team and came back out alone. He said the others were still walking somewhere inside. He could hear their voices. He just couldn't find them no matter which direction he went. A 1991 entry in my Uncle Mark's handwriting. I recognized his messy slanting letters immediately. We're not keeping the lodge to preserve it or because of family feeling. We're keeping it to hold the boundary. As long as the structure stands, as long as someone remembers the rules and follows them, it stays contained to this area. If we abandon it completely, if it falls into ruin with nobody paying attention to it, I believe the boundary fails. I believe it spreads. Slowly at first, maybe, then faster. The final entry was dated December 1997. My father's careful, neat handwriting. We are removing all personal effects and stopping overnight stays completely. The risk is too high and we've already lost too much. But we cannot sell this property. We cannot transfer ownership to anyone outside the family. We cannot allow it to become public land of any kind. Some prison cells don't need guards. They need to be forgotten while remaining locked. God forgive us for not burning it down when we had the chance. Below this, added later in pencil so faint it was almost impossible to read. Can't burn it. Tried. Fire won't take. MH 2003. I sat back from the table. The notebook was shaking in my hands, or my hands were shaking and the notebook was shaking with them. They knew. All of them. Every generation. They had known for decades what this place was, what happened here at night, what it wanted from the people inside it. And they had hidden every scrap of that knowledge, removed it from the lodge, made the place as blank and anonymous as possible. Not to hide the history, to eliminate curiosity, because a warning creates questions. Questions send people looking for answers. Looking for answers means coming here. Coming here is what it feeds on. I turned to the very last page of the notebook, hoping for something more, and found a single sentence written there in fresh dark ink, clearly added recently. If you're reading this, you're already too late to leave safely. Follow the rules until dawn. Every dawn. For as long as it takes. No signature. No date. But the handwriting was mine. I stared at those words, at those specific letters formed in my specific way, and felt the world tilt sideways under me. I hadn't written that. I had never seen this notebook before tonight, but the writing on that page was mine without any possible doubt. My exact letter shapes, my particular way of making certain letters slightly larger than they should be. I turned back through every page of the notebook looking for other entries I might have made and forgotten somehow. Nothing. Just that one sentence on the last page. In fresh ink. In my handwriting. Outside. The afternoon was bleeding into evening. I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I grabbed the notebook, went to the interior bedroom, the one with no windows, and dragged the mattress off the bed and positioned it against the far wall, facing away from the door. Then I sat down and waited for night to come, with the rules in my hands, finally beginning to understand what my family had actually been protecting me from all these years. Not the truth, the choice. The fourth night was the worst one so far, but not because anything came inside or anything hurt me. It was worse because of what I could hear in the patterns now that I was actually listening instead of hiding. The footsteps didn't just circle anymore. They paused, stopped at particular spots around the walls, pressed at different sections as if testing them, measuring them, looking for something specific. The sounds moved with purpose and with thought. The whispering wasn't random noise anymore either. It was responsive. When I shifted my position in the room, the voices outside shifted their focus. When I held my breath and went completely still, they went quieter, as if they were listening back. When my stomach growled close to midnight, something outside let out a low sound that I can only describe as recognition, like a friend acknowledging an inside joke. It was learning me, the way you learn someone you're going to be around for a long time. I made it through to dawn by reading and rereading the notebook, saying the rules to myself over and over like a prayer. Other people had survived this. I could see the evidence of that in every entry, every annotation, every update. People had sat in this same building through these same nights and lived to write about it. I just had to follow the rules. When the sunlight finally came through the cracks in the shutters, I let myself move again. My whole body ached from sitting rigid for hours. My head felt scraped hollow. I opened the shutters carefully, expecting to see the trees even closer. Instead, I saw a man standing at the edge of the clearing, old, maybe 70, wearing a faded canvas jacket and heavy work boots. He stood with his hands in his pockets, completely still, looking at the lodge with an expression I couldn't read from that distance. I watched him through the window for several minutes without moving. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood exactly at the line where the clearing met the forest. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. "You shouldn't be here," I called out. "Neither should you," he replied. His voice carried across the clearing too clearly, too cleanly, the way sound sometimes travels on cold, still mornings. "But here we are. Who are you?" "Someone who made your same mistakes about 40 years ago." He shifted his weight but didn't step closer to the lodge. "You found the notebook, I see." "I did. Took you long enough. You know about this place." I wrote some of that notebook. November 1978 through March 1982. He tilted his head slightly to one side. "You read those entries?" I had. They were among the most carefully written and most disturbing sections. Technical and observational, like a scientist's field notes. And underneath all the precision, a growing weight of dread that got heavier with every page. "You were a caretaker?" I asked. "Tried to be. Your grandfather hired me after he couldn't find anyone in the family willing to stay. Paid me well. I needed the money. Thought I could handle it." He smiled, but not like something was funny. "I was wrong, but I learned to manage it." "How long did you stay?" "For years, on and off. Never more than a week at a time, then back to town. But eventually I couldn't stay away from here even that long. Started to feel it pulling at me when I was in town, calling me back. So I built a cabin." He gestured vaguely to the east. "About 2 miles that way, just outside the boundary. Close enough to watch. Far enough to sleep at night." "You've been watching this lodge all this time?" "For 40 years. Someone has to. Your family stopped coming. Stopped maintaining the balance. I've been doing what I can to keep things stable ever since." "What balance? What is this place?" I came down the porch steps slowly. "Don't." His voice went sharp. "Don't come any closer. And don't ask questions like you're interested in staying. I can hear when someone's starting to belong to it." I stopped. "I'm not interested in staying. I want to leave." "Then why are you still here?" It was the right question and it hit me hard. I had been here 4 days. Nothing had physically stopped me from driving away during the daylight hours. Derek's truck was still sitting in the clearing, keys probably still in the ignition. I could have left at any point, but I couldn't. "Your cousin," the old man said quietly. "He went into the woods." "Yes." "Following a voice." "Yes." "Then he's part of it now." He paused. "Not dead. It doesn't kill. But not alive in any way that's going to matter to anyone who knew him." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. Something small and pale. He tossed it underhand toward me. It landed in the grass about halfway between us. A tooth. A human molar with the root still attached. "Found that on the porch in 1980, he continued, his voice flat and steady. "The morning after that, my partner went into the trees to investigate a sound he'd heard. Then I found another tooth the week after. Then a finger bone. Then a piece of jaw. Over 6 months, I recovered most of him. One piece at a time. Left on the porch like something being returned to me. Piece by piece. My stomach turned over. You're saying it. I'm saying it doesn't hunt bodies. It hunts attention. Recognition. It wants you to look at it, listen to it, acknowledge it. That's what it feeds on. That's what keeps it going. He paused. Your cousin fed it by responding to the voice. By walking into the trees, he accepted whatever the invitation was. Now he's fuel for this thing. Fuel for what exactly? For growth, for persistence, for whatever this thing actually is underneath everything we see of it. He looked past me at the lodge with an expression that was hard and resigned at the same time. The structure was built as a boundary marker by people who understood this forest a lot better than we ever have. Not to keep people out, to keep what's in the forest contained to this area. As long as the lodge stands and someone alive remembers the rules and follows them, the boundary holds. The forest stays in its territory. And if the lodge falls, the boundary fails, spreads, slowly at first. More forest, more territory, more people hearing voices and following sounds and walking into trees they never walk out of again. More copies made of people who never asked to be copied. His eyes met mine. That's why your family couldn't sell, couldn't let it become public property. Can you imagine what would happen if this became a campground? A hiking area? If thousands of people started coming here, hearing voices, following sounds into the dark? I could imagine it too easily. So what do? I asked. Follow the rules. Survive until dawn every night for as long as you can. And then eventually you pass it on. The way I did. The way your grandfather did. The way every person who ever stayed here long enough ended up doing. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. It knows you're alone now. Your cousin is gone. I'm not coming inside. You're the only presence left in that lodge. Why does that matter? Because when it has only one person to focus on, it stops spreading its attention across many shapes and many voices. Consolidates. It becomes direct with you. He glanced back at me. Tonight will be different from the others. Worse in some ways. But if you follow the rules exactly, all of them, you'll survive. You just won't enjoy it. Wait. Don't follow me, he said sharply. Don't come looking for my cabin. The boundary around it is thinner. You'd be outside the lodge's protection the moment you stepped off this property. He walked into the forest without hesitating, stepping between the trees with the ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and the shadows swallowed him in seconds. I stood alone in the clearing, looking at the tooth lying in the grass between my feet. I didn't pick it up. That evening, I followed every rule in the notebook without exception. Shutters closed before sunset. Mattress moved to the interior room. Lights on but turned low. Notebook open across my knees, and I read it from the beginning again, slowly, using it as an anchor to keep myself connected to the reality that other people had been here and survived. The footsteps came early, before full dark, which had never happened before. And the old man had been right. They were different. Not the sound of many feet anymore. One set, one presence, moving slowly and deliberately around the outside of the lodge with a patience that felt ancient. Something that didn't experience time the way I did. And when the voice came, it wasn't a stranger's voice. It wasn't even Derek's voice. It was mine. Let me in, my own voice said from just outside the wall. I'm cold. I pressed my knuckle against my teeth hard and didn't make a sound. I know you're afraid, my voice continued, but it's safe now. I figured it out. I have the rules. You don't have to stay in there all alone. The voice was perfect, not just the right pitch and tone, my exact speech patterns, the specific way I pause between certain words. Even the slight roughness my voice gets when I'm tired. If I had been standing on the other side of that door listening to that voice, I would have believed it completely. Please, my voice said. I don't want to stay out here all night. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, on the rules, on the fact that other people had sat through this exact same thing and written down what they learned. Hours passed. My voice went through every emotional register it could reach. Pleading, reasoning, growing frustrated, going calm, then starting over. It told me things from my childhood that it had no right to know. It repeated conversations I'd had. It knew my mother's middle name, my father's birthday, the name of the dog I had when I was 7. It knew me completely, and it used every piece of that knowledge like a tool. And then, sometime after midnight, it said something that almost broke through everything I had built up. I know you're reading the notebook. I know you saw what's written on the last page. You understand now, don't you? You were always supposed to be here. This is where you belong. I opened my eyes and looked at the notebook in my lap. The last page. If you're reading this, you're already too late to leave safely. In my handwriting. You'll write it, my voice said softly from outside. When this night is over, you'll write it because you'll understand why it's true. This place needs a witness, a guardian, someone to stay, and you're already chosen. I wanted to say out loud that I hadn't chosen anything, that this was random, that I could still leave. But the words felt empty even in my own head, because I was still here, and some part of me, a part that had been growing steadily larger each night, had already stopped fighting the idea of staying, had started to find something almost meaningful in it, in being the one who understood what this was and stayed anyway. Dawn came. The voice stopped mid-sentence, cut off sharp and clean like a recording stopping. The footsteps ceased. I waited another full hour before moving. When I finally opened the notebook again, there was a new entry on the last page. In my handwriting, dated that day, Night 4 survived. It knows my voice now. It knows me, but I'm still here, still following the rules. That has to count for something. 3 more nights passed, and I existed in a state somewhere between prisoner and person who had stopped trying to escape. I followed the rules with mechanical precision. I watched myself change in small ways I couldn't stop. I started talking about myself in the third person when I reviewed the rules out loud, as if the person following the rules and the person watching that behavior were 2 separate people sharing one body. I began to feel the approach of the nightly circling before it started. 30 minutes before sunset, I could feel something shift in the air, in the quality of the silence, and I would start preparing myself mentally without thinking about it. The notebook was filling up with entries in my handwriting that I had no memory of writing. Observations, updates, new rules written in the margins. All of it accurate, all of it useful, all of it written by me during hours I couldn't consciously account for. On the 7th night, I found a new rule I had written at the bottom of a page without any memory of doing it. 7b. Do not try to remember everything from the night in the morning. Let the gaps exist. Some memories are not meant to be recovered. I stared at those words for a long time, turning them over in my mind. What exactly was I protecting myself from knowing? The real test came on the 8th night. I was in my usual spot in the interior room, reading the notebook by flashlight, waiting for the footsteps to begin. Instead, I heard something completely different. Knocking. 3 slow, measured knocks on the front door. Polite, deliberate, the kind of knock a normal person makes when they've arrived somewhere. And then Derek's voice. Danny? You in there, man? My blood went cold. Come on. I know you're mad at me. I get it. I shouldn't have gone outside. But I'm back now, I'm okay. Can you please let me in? I sat completely frozen, one hand clenched around the notebook. Rule 2. Do not respond to voices outside, regardless of what they say or who they claim to be. I'm freezing, Danny. Please. I've been walking for days trying to find my way back. I can see the lights on under the door. I know you're there. The voice was perfect in a way that made the previous performances sound rough by comparison. Not theatrical, not off in any way I could identify. This sounded exactly like Derek after days of walking through a cold Michigan forest. Exhausted, stiff, genuinely cold, slightly frustrated in the very specific way Derek got frustrated when he thought someone was being unreasonable. "I found something out there," Derek's voice continued. "Something important. I understand now why the family has always stayed away from this place. You were completely right, Danny, but I need to get inside to explain it to you." I grabbed the notebook and flipped through it fast, looking for guidance. Near the back, I found a rule I had apparently written myself 2 nights earlier. Rule 9. If something claims to have found information or understanding and offers to share it, do not engage. Truth that comes from the forest is poisoned by what it costs you to receive it. The knocking came again, harder this time. "Danny, stop messing around. It's me. It's really me. You want proof? I'll prove it. Tell me something to prove and I'll prove it." And then Derek's voice began reciting things. Childhood stories that only the two of us knew. Private jokes from family gatherings years ago. The exact words of the conversation we had had the afternoon before he went outside. Perfect recall. Perfect cadence. Every detail exactly right. I felt my certainty starting to bend. What if it was actually Derek? What if he had somehow gotten away from whatever took him, and had spent days trying to find his way back to the lodge, and I was sitting in here refusing to open the door because of rules written by frightened people 50 years ago? "Please," Derek's voice said, and something broke in it. Genuine fear came through. Genuine desperation. "Please, Danny, don't leave me out here. Please. Your family." My hand was reaching for the door before I knew I had stood up. I caught myself with my fingers inches from the lock, shocked to realize I had crossed the room without making a conscious decision to move. I backed away fast, heart pounding. That's it. Derek's voice had changed. The desperation was gone, replaced by something cooler, more interested. "You're really not going to open it, even for me?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat had completely locked up. Interesting. The voice had gone completely flat now. Clinical. Analytical. "You held to the rule even when I was perfect. Even when I gave you every possible reason to doubt." The temperature dropped hard. My breath turned to fog so thick I could barely see through it. "I've been practicing," the voice continued. Still in Derek's register, but with none of his personality left in it now. "Every night, learning how you respond, learning which memories hit hardest, which emotional angles get through your defenses. You're actually very consistent. It makes you predictable. Something scraped along the door. Not claws, not nails. Something harder and more methodical. The sound of something measuring, calculating. But you have an inconsistency," the voice said thoughtfully. "A weakness. Would you like to know what it is?" I pressed my hands over my ears. It didn't help. The voice wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside my head, clear and resonant, bypassing my ears entirely. Guilt. I stumbled backward and hit the wall. "You feel guilty about Derek, about not stopping him, about the part of you that wanted to see what would happen when he went outside. You're following the rules, you're reading the notebook, you're doing everything right. But you wanted this. You wanted to be here alone with this mystery. You wanted to stop pretending everything in your life was fine." Tears were running down my face. I couldn't tell if they were from fear or from the awful recognition of something true. "The lodge isn't a prison," the voice said, gentle now, almost kind. "It's an opportunity. Everyone who has ever stayed here, everyone who survived, they all made the same choice eventually. They stopped fighting and started learning. They became witnesses, guardians, participants in something larger than themselves. The scratching on the door was getting faster, more urgent, like something writing. You're already writing in the notebook, already adding rules, already making this space more efficient for survival. You're adapting so well. I looked down and realized I was holding a pen. The notebook was open to a blank page in my lap. My hand had been moving across it while the voice spoke, writing automatically without any instruction from me. Temperature drop indicates direct attention. Voice modulation more sophisticated than previous nights. Guilt manipulation effective. Must reinforce interior boundary awareness. My handwriting. My analysis. Written while I sat there listening. You see? The voice said, pleased. You already understand. You're already part of the process. The scratching stopped. Silence fell heavy and waiting. And then, carved into the front door in letters I could see glowing faintly from across the room. If it sounds human, it isn't. The same rule from the notebook, now written on the door. Confirmation and threat and warning all merged into the same sentence. I sank to the floor with the notebook against my chest and felt the understanding come over me like cold water poured slowly from above. It wasn't trying to kill me. It wasn't trying to drive me out. It was trying to change me, to move me from someone who was trapped in the lodge to someone who chose to stay, from prisoner to priest, from victim to volunteer. And it was working, because despite everything I had been through, despite all the fear and manipulation and horror of the last several days, I was still here. And the part of me that wanted to stay, that part was getting bigger every night. Dawn came like it always does. The voice stopped mid-sentence. The footsteps ceased. When I checked the door in the morning, the carved letters were gone. The wood was smooth and unmarked, as if nothing had ever touched it. But in the notebook, a new entry, Night 8. It offered a partnership. I refused, but the offer remains. Every night it remains. I tried to leave on the morning of the 10th day. I packed a bag carefully and methodically. Derek's truck keys from the hook by the door, the notebook tucked under my arm because leaving it felt like abandoning the only proof of everything, and I walked outside with my head down and crossed the clearing without once looking at the tree line. The truck started immediately, reliable and normal. I pulled out onto the dirt access road and drove away from the lodge, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. 20 minutes later, I came around a curve in the road, and the lodge was directly ahead of me. I checked my odometer. I had driven 8.3 miles. The access road was only 2 miles long. I turned around, drove the other direction. 15 minutes later, the lodge appeared from around a different curve on a different stretch of road. But it was the same building, unmistakably the same. I tried 4 more times. Different speeds, different turns where the road branched. Every single attempt ended exactly the same way. The lodge waiting patiently at the end of whatever road I took. On my 6th attempt, I stopped the truck and got out and started walking. If the road was somehow compromised, I would go through the forest, navigate by compass, trust the ground under my feet and the direction I was pointed. 3 hours later, I walked out of the tree line into the lodge clearing, coming in from a direction I hadn't started from. The forest had folded around me, or I had never actually left, or leaving had become a concept that no longer had any physical meaning attached to it. I stood in the clearing and looked at the lodge and understood. I wasn't locked in by walls or bars or any physical restraint. I was part of this place now. The boundary hadn't just contained the forest. It had absorbed me into its geography. I existed in relation to the lodge the way a compass needle exists in relation to north. Leaving required a kind of permission that I didn't have and didn't know how to earn. Inside, the notebook was open to a new entry I hadn't written consciously. Day 10. Attempted departure. Failed as expected. The guardian bond is complete. Physical distance from the lodge is no longer possible. Must accept the role fully or risk the boundary failing through neglect. Time to stop resisting and start learning. That night, I didn't go to the interior room. I sat in the main room with the lights on and the notebook open and waited for the circling to begin. When it did, I didn't hide. I listened, and for the first time, I tried to hear it differently. Not as threat, as information. The whispers weren't random at all. They were communication, pieces of memory, fragments of recorded experience, stored in the wood and the soil and the air around this place. Not trying to hurt me, but trying to teach me something, to integrate me into what the lodge actually was and had always been. I heard my great-grandfather's voice explaining how he had chosen this site for building directly over a place where the forest had been folding inward on itself for years already, long before he arrived. I heard family conversations from decades past, people trying to work out what they had gotten themselves into and what their obligation to the rest of the world was. And I heard Derek, not the version of Derek that had knocked on the door. The real Derek in the last clear moments before the forest copied him. Confused, afraid, and then, underneath the fear, something quieter. A strange kind of calm as he began to understand that he wasn't being destroyed. He was being preserved, added to the archive. The copies weren't malicious. They weren't evil reflections trying to take over lives. They were records, incomplete recordings of everyone who had entered the forest, stored in living wood, maintained inside the boundary, held in place by the presence of the originals so they could never spread outward and replace the people they were copied from. The lodge was a library. The guardians were its librarians. I opened the notebook and wrote without any compulsion, just from understanding. The price of our family's hunting on this land was stewardship of what the land hunted in return. Our echoes, our stored selves. We introduced too many people to a place that collected them all. Now we maintain the result by staying present, by being here, by proving we still exist so the copies stay dormant. This isn't a punishment, it's a responsibility. I'm not trapped, I'm employed. Days passed, then weeks. I stopped counting at some point. The routine became natural. Follow the rules at night, maintain the lodge during the day. Listen to the whispers and try to organize what I heard, add entries to the notebook, document new things I learned. One morning I woke up and realized I couldn't clearly remember my mother's face. I knew facts about her, hair color, height, the sound of her voice in a general way. But the specific details of her face had gone soft and blurry like a photograph left in the sun. I picked up my phone. The photos wouldn't load. No signal. No data, no connection to anything outside this property. It was beginning, the gradual loosening of everything that tied me to the world beyond the lodge. I added one final entry for whoever came after me. I stayed because I thought I could understand it. Then I stayed because I thought I was helping. Now I stay because leaving has no meaning anymore. There is no away from here, only degrees of closeness to the boundary. If you're reading this, you made the same choices I did. Curiosity, desperation, stubbornness. I'm sorry, but also welcome. The rules work. Follow them. The lodge will keep you safe from the copies as long as you keep the copies safe from the world. This is the bargain. This is the purpose. Whatever you do, don't forget that you're the original. That's the only rule that really matters in the end. One night, while I was sitting in the main room listening to the familiar circling outside, I heard a new sound. Car on the access road. Getting closer. I went to the window. Car pulled into the clearing. A young woman got out. She stood looking at the lodge with the particular expression of someone trying to remember something they only half know. That look of confused recognition. She had family in her face. I could see it from where I stood. She saw me through the window and gave a small, uncertain wave. I had a choice. I could warn her, tell her to get back in her car right now and drive and not stop and not look back. Tell her everything and hope she was smart enough and scared enough to actually leave. Or I could let her find her own way through it, the way I had. Warning creates curiosity. Curiosity creates presence. Presence creates guardianship. I opened the front door but stayed on the threshold. You're probably looking for somewhere to stay, I said. There are rules you need to follow, important ones. She came up toward the porch cautiously. Rules. If you're staying after dark. I held up the notebook. They're all written down. Are you Danny? She asked. I'm Emily, cousin Sarah's daughter. The family said you'd been up here for a while, and I thought. You thought you'd check on me, I finished, and probably stay a night or two. Free place to sleep. She nodded, looking a little embarrassed. Is that okay? Behind her, the sun was on the horizon. The trees at the edge of the clearing were already starting their slow nightly shift. The boundary was preparing. I had maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes to say the right words and mean them and break the cycle right here. Instead, I heard myself say, "It's fine. Come inside. I'll explain everything." She smiled, relieved, and stepped over the threshold. I closed the door behind her and listened to the first footsteps begin their nightly circuit around the walls. The lodge had its next candidate, and I had become exactly what I had feared becoming. The one who passes on the obligation by helping someone survive it. In the notebook that night, a new entry appeared in handwriting I didn't recognize. Emily's neat, rounded letters, dated 3 weeks from that day. Found Danny's notes, found the rules, tried to leave but came back. He says it's temporary. He says I can go once I understand what this place is. I think he's lying to me. I think he's forgotten that leaving was ever possible for him. I think I'm becoming the next guardian. I think this is exactly how it always happens. I set the notebook down and watched Emily unpack her bag, asking cheerful, normal questions about the generator and the water pump. Normal questions. Innocent questions. She would find the answers herself soon enough. We all do. The forest remembers. The copies wait. The guardians serve. And the lodge, patient and permanent and older than any of us, continues its purpose. Containing what we released when we built our hunting camp on land that was never meant to belong to anyone. Some prisons don't need guards. They need to be forgotten while remaining locked. But we can't forget. That is the cruelest part of all of it. We have to remember exactly what we're guarding and why we can't leave and what happens to the world beyond these trees if we fail in our duty. We have to remember ourselves completely, hold on to who we are with both hands, until eventually, one ordinary morning, we find that we can't anymore. And then we step outside, and we take our place in the circle. And the lodge waits quietly for the next guardian to find their way up the access road. The boundary holds. It always holds, as long as someone stays. Note found in the lodge attic. Undated. Author unknown. If you are reading this, you have already stayed too long. The fact that you found this notebook means you were always going to find it. The lodge brought you here. The forest selected you. Your family, knowingly or not, offered you up to this place. There is no escape clause. There is no loophole hidden somewhere in the rules. There is no secret final instruction that sets you free. There is only survival and service, and the slow, quiet certainty that you are never the main character of this story. You are always the next chapter. Welcome home, Guardian.